Hi, Lyssa deHart here. Thank you for being here on the coaching studio today. I am very excited to introduce my guest today, Ben Koh. Ben is a MCC, Master Certified Coach with the ICF, and he is a person who believes very deeply that there is no greater reward than seeing people realize their potential and live fuller lives. He's firmly committed to advancing the art, science, and practice of professional coaching and helping many others become certified coaches. There's several things that are, I think, important to know about Ben. Ben has a coaching school. He's the founder of the Coaching Masters Academy. He's also incredibly cross-culturally competent, having worked in more than 18 different countries with multitudes of people. He has more than really 17 years experience in the field of people development, and he is just really having fun out there on a global platform. Ben, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your willingness to play.
Thank you, Lyssa. Thank you so very much to have me into your podcast.
Well, you are very welcome to be here. So, you know a little bit about the fact that I'm going to start off with this question because I'm always so fascinated, like what brings people into the coaching space and hooks them. So I'm really curious, like, how did you end up in coaching?
Well, Lyssa, to be very frank with you, I really started off in a wrong footing, mainly because like some of the, there will be some people out there who are just crazy about getting a certification or a credential. Let me be very honest, that's basically my primary motive when I first started way back, I think around, during that time, it's between 2006, where I mean during those times the ethos around it is more certification to so that was that period of time where people are just so excited about just getting trained and certified in the various form. So that's how I started, and mainly because prior to that I always believed that I'm a coach because you know coach as in a verb form, there's something that you do to help people to do things better, to improve things better. That was what I've been doing, at the leadership development level. And I thought that I was just coaching people, but then it was then that ICF, I get to kind of like hear that that is a regulator body that's kind of like govern this whole business of coaching. And that's what I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll just get certified and be properly recognized as a professional coach. And that time I was living in Kazakhstan, and technology like coaching and stuff like that wasn't really available, and the only options for me to complete the learning is via online platform. And so happily, I just get it done. I need to confess that at that point of time, my primary motive is just get it done and just move
Yeah.
on, right? But it was only in somewhere around 2010 that I started to become more serious about what professional coaching is. Not because that I never believed that coaching can bring change, but I never see it personally with my own experience that it can impact such a multitude of people. To give a good background around that, I was in Kazakhstan at that period of time, and then it was incidentally on one summer day, as I was returning back from a jogging, and passed by a school, and usually, a typical scene that you expect to see is students hanging outside the school and kind of like talking and cheering up and stuff like that. But on that particular day, as I was coming back, something struck me. It's like a lightning strikes me, and I felt so much fury and anger inside of me that I felt like going to the boys and grab them by the neck and just pull them up and just wake up, wake up. Why do you need to behave like a loser? You see. Now, to understand that, we need to have, I need to kind of share a little bit about the background about how the educational contour looks like in Kazakhstan. Now, as we all know, during that time, Kazakhstan is part of the former Soviet Union of USSR, and they gained their independence way back during that time, and the country was at the verge of developing. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? And yet we saw this group of students kind of like, was pretty kind of like, feeling lost and wasn't really, excited about the future. And you need to also understand that I was born in Singapore and living in Kazakhstan. And when I saw that, it just reminds me of Singapore. As you can see, Singapore was just a little island. And we're very thankful for our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who, who believed that, yes, we have nothing. Literally, we don't produce gas, we don't produce oil, we don't grow anything. We're just a little island, right? And then we get kind of like he wanted so much to join together with Malaysia, but Malaysia just say, oh, come on, out you go. Like, ah. But we were left with nothing, but yet he firmly believes that even though we may not have all the natural resources, but we have the most precious one in the planet, and that's human being. And
Mm.
he says that if we can invest in education, we can invest in our people, we can make it. And
Yeah.
I think that's the history of Singapore, that we really make it to, to the world stage because of education and investing on people. And that moment when I was standing there among the boys, that reminded me a lot. As in, hey, you can do something about it. It's up to you to believe it.
Mm.
And incidentally, what happens at that time? You need to find out a little. That was very interesting about the educational system in Kazakhstan. Now, in the educational systems, the government is so generous to be able to employ one psychology in every school, every college, every university. Imagine that every school has one psychology. And you might be interesting to find out that what's the JD of this psychology. Now, this is what they do every day. They run psychometric assessment on the kids so that they can tell them what is wrong with them.
Nice. And how does wow. So a couple things that are really showing up as you say that. Wow, a way to demotivate a kid. Yeah, amazing.
And that was what strikes me. If that is what the government is prepared to invest of having a psychology in a school, college, and university so that they can run psychometrics and let them know this is what is not right with you. One thing that strikes me was, wow, what an opportunity. What
Yeah.
an opportunity whereby you can have one life coach in every school, every college, and every university telling the students what is right about them. And,
Yeah.
the bad
And
news is,
yeah,
so
and
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, Ben, I really love this. Well, the transparency. I mean, I think a lot of people come into coaching and they're like, I want this certification, and it's like, it's all about getting this piece of paper. And I
Yeah,
really love this evolution that you describe of really moving into the recognition of the power of human potential. And this story really illustrates it also, just the passion
yes,
for these kids so that they discover what's right about them, that they can then
precisely,
leverage what's right about them so that they can
precisely,
create
precisely,
something meaningful. Wow. Yeah.
precisely.
Yeah.
Go
And
ahead,
so
go ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry. Say that again.
So that's where what strikes me on that time is that, you know, all we need to do is simply upgrade or retrain or at least at that point of time, that's where I became more serious and in a sense that, hey, let me just confess that it started off with just a business opportunity to say, wow, that is a
Right.
business market for you to step in, right? All you need to do is to
It is,
switch.
and
It's like you just have to switch the way of thinking. And then I was thinking, wow, this is a very good opportunity for me to introduce positive psychology to this very new country. I mean, who has heard about Kazakhstan and way back in 2010? You know, that was when they have not entered into the world stage with the Olympics, and nobody actually knows about these countries in Central Asia, right? So I said, wow, there's such a strategic time in a strategic place. And I say, wow, okay, simple. What do we need? We just need to have an academy that produce or train or upskills or whatever you name that, teachers or psychologists into life coaches. And after all, it's just skills that we are imparting to them, and not so much of getting them to be a life coach, but using life coaching skills to go about working with your students. And voila, and that's what happens where get me involved in starting a school for that reason. And so we started a school by a time called I'm a Life Coach Academy, with the purpose of the vision that change is possible. And coaching is a tool, a platform, a way in which we can achieve that, you see. So that was where it got started, with the whole idea of, you know, coaching. And when that's where I get a little bit more into trying to inspire change rather than just doing what I thought I used to be doing, to coach people as a verb form. Now I begin
yeah,
to see that as a coaching, not just as something I do as a verb form, but coaching as a mission,
yeah,
something to achieve, you
yeah.
know, for people.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that distinction also. It isn't, you're not doing coaching to people.
Yeah,
You're really being present as a coach in that space of curiosity and possibility with people.
yeah, that's
Really
true.
big
And so
difference.
that's where I began to really appreciate the whole concept of coaching as a mission and as a leader of change,
Mhm.
as to what do I want to be in this space of seeing humans advancement. And I think during that time the change was rather drastic, as in I see people in terms of development, leadership development, to develop people.
Mhm.
And then as I started to work, as we started the school of I'm a Life Coach Academy, and then kind of like started to produce coaches or to train teachers and educators, I begin to see that it's not about just people development. It's about helping people to embrace, a way of new being, more than just develop their skills and capacity, but helping another human being to fully step into what they can create for themselves. And I think that's where the beginning part of this whole entire new journey. And of course, and then no, of course, but then things turned around whereby way back in 2012, my family decided to relocate back to Singapore. And that's where I was kind of being kind of put out of this little nice, country whereby nobody knows about coaching, and then put into, back in Singapore where people knows about coaching to a large extent, because, it's well connected to the global stage. And then that's where I get to, wow, what happens in that 2 year period was we managed to get into universities to work with the students leader, because I think during that stage of time, I have identified that I think the young adults are much more ready to step into that space of um, uh, um, change, because they are the transition between their universities and their working career life. So we were very actively involved in doing the people development program, coupled that with group coaching as in an individual coaching as a program for the university to enhance the student leadership. It was in that 2 year space that I see how, you know, hundreds of students,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like coming into the program, feeling unsure and doubting with a lot of issues and stuff like that, and walking out of the program feeling excited about themselves, seeing able to see a future for themselves, and the change was so because I know the students as we taught them the personal development, life skills, and then we coach them and work with them, at that level. So it was after that that I began to say, wow, there must be something about this whole thing that we're doing that create.
Yeah,
And because I know them personally, it's not just one client at a time, it's kind of
right.
like a class of people of 30, 40 batches after batches,
Mm-hmm.
that I decided that, wow, maybe this is what I'm going to do, more
Yeah.
seriously.
And it really, that evolution into that the being of the
Yeah,
coach
yeah,
versus the doing of the coaching. So,
precisely.
and I mean, I'm really interested also, like in your, I really hear the passion around working with the students and really leveraging human potential that showed up for you and enthused your coaching, right? I really can hear that in your voice as you're talking. What do you see as the thing that you had to really explore within
Mm,
yourself so that you
yes,
could show up in such a way with people for their potential?
true. I think through that whole entire journey, as I recall back, you know, as after I left, after we arrived back to Singapore, we started Coach Masters Academy and continue the good work and be able to expand right now today to 7 different continents with 1,000 over students every year. In the whole entire journey, I see myself growing as an individual because number one, I do believe that, the growth of your impact is proportional to your growth for your individual.
Mm-hmm.
And over those years, over the 7 8 years of building up the academy, there's a couple of things that I feel that is really key. Number one, the approach that you embrace. Well, there's a lot of things that you can do in terms of coaching, but I guess I come to a point to realize that if I truly want to bring about a change, as in not as a replace something or to put something in place, but to be able to embody something new,
Mm-hmm.
then the approach that you approach that you use is going to be a critical part of that process. And that's where I felt that one of the key pillars here is the constant learning about the science of change. Well, I'm not talking about just the science of coaching, but because coaching is all about bringing that positive change. And you need tools, you need processes, you need concepts, you need some understanding of what the process is. If not otherwise, how can you call yourself an expert of the process just because you learn some techniques? Techniques are good, but in the scheme of impact, techniques is like our skin, the outer layer,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
just a form of it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to learn techniques and tools,
But
right?
without that
But
underlying
yes,
understanding of what motivates and how the technique is useful, it's just a technique versus what you're talking
precisely.
about.
And
Yeah.
you will be stuck in just doing the form and
Mm-hmm.
not understanding the essence,
Yeah.
right? And so we need to understand, like for example, the understanding of human nature is going to be a big bonus for you because ultimately you need to reckon that you're working with people, right? You're not working with machines, right?
Yeah.
So if you can understand empirically, or you continue to devote yourself to the learning of how humans think, how human responds, what is, with those deep understanding. I'm not saying that you need to be a psychology or psychology students or your kind of thing, but
Right.
I'm talking about giving yourself that opportunity to learn something outside coaching.
Right.
The understanding of humans' nature is a complementary, to how you're going to be able to create a process of change. So being diligent to learn and deepen your conceptual understanding on the science of change becomes one of the hallmark, I think, of becoming a masterful coach eventually.
Yeah, I really want to amplify that understanding of what it takes to change, the capacity for change is so elemental to being able to sit in curiosity with another person.
Yeah.
One of the things that there's a couple of thoughts that are coming up as we're talking, but one of them is really the sense of it's that self-reflective piece also, because I do have a background in in psychology. I was a clinical social worker for many years, and I'll tell you, one of the ways that I learned many of the human developmental stages was I was self-reflective, like, oh, look, this is what people do because look at what I'm doing, right? Like, or that reminds me of my dad, and that's my mom, and that's my friend, and whoever. And I think that there's this self-reflective piece also. Like, I think as you're talking, one of the things I really see is if we aren't authentic with ourselves, if we don't start to understand what motivates us, what our biases are, where we drive towards, where we drive, what we push away from, it's going to limit our capacity to be curious with other people about those things that show up for them. Those things may be different for them, but if we haven't done our work, how do we show up with other people to do theirs?
Precisely. I
Yeah.
absolutely salute that to you. If we don't work with ourselves,
Yeah.
because it's from the spring of life that is from within you, that you're able to offer that to your client,
Yeah.
right? So we are that complement, kind of like mirror effect, you know what I mean? That our
Yeah.
message, um and human being is we are working with a human being, not a machine. And people can connect to you. People, even though they may not know coaching, to a large extent, your client can can see you
Yeah.
as a human being too, right? And I think the greatest impact here is where the painter becomes the painting itself,
Oh, I love that metaphor, Ben. The
right?
painter
And that's
becomes
where,
the painting.
yeah, when the two become one, and that's where audience can say, wow, I see the painter, the artist behind this painting and what he is thinking about. You know what I mean? And people can read, what that painting is. And that's where it becomes an artwork,
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
just another decoration that you put on the wall, right?
Right.
So
Not
our
just a
clients,
certificate.
yes, it's not just a certain, but it begins that for me. But then kind of like, wow, things just caught up with you, and you find purpose in whatever that you do, and then that purpose actually propels you to be that kind of person because you really want to give all the best for that, and they kind of like kind of reciprocate back to you, and
Mhm.
then that's where it allows me to be a better coach. And I think I need to give credit to all my students, because we really want them to succeed. And I think they have taught us so much how to be a coach, even though we are training them to be a coach, just like how our kids taught us parents to be better in that sense. And I think the students really help me and challenge me each day, about, hey, walk your talk,
Yeah.
about learning to guard yourself, and henceforth things like your daily reflections, your taking time to sort out your thought as an individual, and doing your disciplines and practice as a coach becomes easier because it's not a chore anymore, but this is just the basic basic stuff that you need to do, and then wake up,
Yeah.
brush your teeth. I mean, you don't have to be motivated to go and say, oh, remember to brush your teeth every morning.
Right.
Like you
It's
just
just
do
that,
it because
yeah, you form the habit of it, right? Because it's meaningful to you. And so the ICF has come out with the newest core competency coaching mindset. How does that impact, I'm not sure how that impacts that. I'm not sure that's the question, but how do you see that as asking coaches to do exactly the thing that you're talking about, which is to create that sense of their own, how they're showing up in the coaching? How is that showing up for you? And what are you noticing with yourself and the coaching mindset?
yes. So I think one of the things that I responded to that is number one, whether it's a new competence, a new model or old model, there are wisdoms in that document that has been created. And instead of seeing them as a marker that I need to meet and demonstrate, I often kind of like encourage coaches to see that as a way of informing you
Mm-hmm.
of how you need to think as a professional.
Yeah.
Not so much of you trying to demonstrate it, but try to understand how is that informing me about a way of thinking as a coach. And ultimately, you need to understand this simple formula. How we think is how we will respond.
Yeah.
Our behavior will be more impactful, deliberate, intentional when we are more mindful about how we think. And those new competencies, I mean, the new model, those competencies are just truth and wisdoms,
Mm-hmm.
right? In terms of how you see, in terms of how our clients will react and respond to their situation, and how you can be that mirror to bring that up. So it's a way of just informing how you need to think, not something that you do to the client, but how is that allowing you to see your client
Yeah.
from that documents. So that is an important part of any profession, that you think, like the industry, like teachers think like teachers, and they speak like teachers, and they do what teachers do. Engineers think like an engineer and do what an engineer do, because that's how their mind are being programmed.
Right. It's how the mind has been programmed. Yeah. And that's it. I think that's a really crucial element also. I mean, these become habits of how we choose to think and how we choose to look at the
Yes,
world. And the competencies give us a framework, and with the
precisely,
wisdoms, as you say, to
precisely.
expand how we look at the world. And I mean, one of the things that shows up for me in my own coaching, arc or development, has been also letting go of the need to be the expert, right? So that I can
Yes.
show up with the client fully and ask the question that's going to be most useful. And so, yeah, no, I think that is so important, that the competencies really just provide a framework of how we show up
Yes.
with other people that fits with what you're talking about, how humans make changes, right? It fits with that.
Precisely.
Yeah, and
Yes.
it's beautiful. What do you think is one of the things that you see, because you work with a lot of students, what is something that you see kind of across the board that you think is important for new coaches to understand about coaching?
Wow.
Or is that too big of a question?
I think fundamentally, coaches also have their own developmental stages, which one thing that I begin to appreciate, as they come with the first level, and then they move on to the second level and the third level, just as how ICF has beautifully prepared the different levels of credential.
Mhm.
And I would like to see that as a different developmental stages of the ability to um, appreciate coaching at different level of impact,
Mhm.
right? So at the first level, I think one of the things that I felt that is useful is a shift of a mindset to a learning mindset, right? Yes, and that's where the hallmark of that, the curiosity to learn, becomes a very important shift that coaches need to breakthrough. Now, if from a management point of view, we don't want to change. I mean, you can change a lot of things, but then we like to find that tipping point, the one that gives us the greatest leverage, but with the smallest effort, right?
Yeah.
So I guess if they can break through that mindset to a learning mindset, then they will stop that linear approach of seeing cause and effect. If they stop seeing cause and effect, then they will stop trying to go for a solution or trying to help them to go to point B. There's nothing wrong with going point B, but that's so much your impact is in terms of what you can offer in terms of your change initiative. But by learning more techniques, it's only helping you to get to point B faster. But it doesn't change the journey of how you help people to move from point A to point B.
And I see this too, like, I mean, in the work that I've done with people also is you can tell people all sorts of things that they need to do, but until they embody the awareness themselves, the change isn't sustainable, right?
Precisely.
And so from what I'm hearing there's this developmental these stages that coaches go through, and that first stage often is that driving towards the solution. I'm going to help you fix your problem, right? I'm going to get this done. And then it's really stepping out of that in order to be with somebody, right?
And I do confess, yes, that was how I was coaching way back in the early days. That's why when I look back and then I say, oh, I wish that someone could just be there to say, hey, you're not curious. You're not embodying a learning mindset. I thought I'm just helping them to learn about the situation. Well, that's learning about the situation is not about deepening the learning of how they are seeing. So that's different from gaining self-awareness.
That is really important. Learning about the situation is not going to help them in learning how to move through towards what's important to them. And I think, I mean, that's a beautiful reminder for how we need to show up as coaches to be curious with people. It's through that curiosity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so that's the first stage, that is to be able to have a learning mindset. And I think as they move on to the second stage, which is basically where the PCC credential is, that's where we challenge them to grow the curiosity piece. Because fundamentally, I guess what makes the coaching impact is really the whole sense of curiosity coupled with a learning approach or a learning mindset. And then the mastery is that's how you can do these two things, in a way that is seamless and natural. So in the second level, where we're preparing them for their PCC credential, or that's where I think they're ready to be curious around the whole aspect of the clients, which is a little bit much more challenging to pick it up. That's where we give them proper understanding around the human's nature. Now, we all understand what is concern. We all understand what is goal and belief and assumption and stuff like that, but they're just words. Until you get to play with them and begin to see that this is how it shows up, in their conversation.
For that person. Yeah.
Yeah. And so usually we tell students, look, there's a difference between going to the zoo and going to the safari. That means all these nice things that you're supposed to look for doesn't nicely, organize properly, and then you enter in, and this is where the elephant is, and this is where the giraffe is, and you can see it here and stuff like that. They are not organized in that manner. They are just in the safari, and you just need to use your knowledge about that creature to go and look for them.
Human beings are definitely not in a zoo. They're on the Serengeti for sure.
But you can see some of this, approach is just learning the technique and just, memorizing the questions and trying to get some procedure done. It's just like going to the zoo and seeing that your clients is like,
Like
so
if you
organized.
do this, then you'll get this, and then you'll do that, and then this will happen, and this is sort of the thing, right? Yeah, absolutely. And it's really funny too, because we all know it doesn't work for us if somebody tells us what to do. Unless you're building something like, I don't know, a chicken coop, nobody really wants directions. We want to have a thought partner, right?
Yes.
We want a thought partner.
agree with you.
And I'm always sort of curious too, like, I hear this at times from coaches, like, do I need a coach if I'm a coach? And I'll hear all kinds of interesting things like, well, I've never found a coach good enough for me, which I always think is sort of a hilarious response. But I think, what are your thoughts on coaches having coaches? I would love to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, who doesn't need a friend?
Right?
I need a friend. Okay, even how good am I? Sometimes I just need to call somebody and say, hey, this person really drive me nuts. And why can't he just come think and blah, 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 blah. And then after that, my girlfriends will just say, well, so how do you feel now? Oh, I feel great now. I'm no longer feel frustrated. Or sometimes we just say, hey, hold on there. Do you have any biases here? Okay, you caught me there. We need friends, right? Because I'm not immune. Even I'm a coach, I'm still a human being. I'm not immune to what my clients is suffering from. Okay, because
Right.
I also have my own mess to deal with, right? And if my clients need a coach because they can't see their mess, and I'm also the human being, I also need a friend to just show me the mess that I'm in. You know what I mean?
To hold up the
So
mirror. Yeah.
we just hold the mirrors. I mean, you don't have to say that I need a coach. Just say I need a friend who is a coach. That makes a world of difference. I
Yes,
need to
it
talk
does.
to a friend who is a coach and just tell him that I'm seeing you as a friend who is a coach, not a friend who is my friend.
Yeah, because I think there is that clarity of distance that comes in a coaching relationship also, because our job is to be curious about what might be getting in the way. Like, and to your point, like, what biases got triggered by this annoyance with this client,
Precisely.
right? And it's very difficult. There's a saying, I don't know who discovered water, but it was not a fish, right? Because the fish just lives in the water. Right? They didn't discover it, they're just
Yep.
there.
Yes, fish
And
doesn't talk about the water. That's the
no, they
point.
don't. It's just it's the air they breathe. And I think it's true with our biases and with the places where, we have, I don't know, where our stuff gets mixed in with our clients' stuff also. And so I
Yes,
think
yes.
having that external partnership with a friend who's a coach can be incredibly useful.
Incredible. And I think the second piece here is that is one piece that you can have a friend who is a coach that you can talk to. And the second piece, as a professional coach, you certainly want to get feedback
Mhm.
on how you are coaching, not so much in terms of the coaching skills, but how you show up as a coach in that conversation.
Mhm.
And that's where I truly, truly, truly respect some of my mentors and teachers who have taught me. And I'm sure there's a lot of great people out there, like for example, from time to time, once every 2 years, I'll go back to my mentor, which is Janet Harvey, to just kind of like get her to wake up. That's not how, because she grow as an individual too. Everybody grow, right? So as she grows in her own wisdoms of how she see coaching, she's able to use that perspective to help me to see how I'm doing coaching at this level, right?
Yeah.
And it's so useful to get another perspective from another coach that that is also growing and developing and have new insight and perspective. I'm not necessarily asking the person to coach me, but hey, having a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue
Yeah.
is
I mean,
important.
I'm really hearing coaching supervision as an element of this, right? This partnership to explore the coaching experience that we're having, right?
Yes,
And I
very
really
important.
admire that you bring this up too, because I mean, over and over again, as I'm talking to coaches, MCC coaches, everyone is in a process of continuing self-growth.
Yes.
And so it becomes that irony for coaches when they say, I don't need it. I'm a coach. You should buy my services because I'm a really good coach, but I don't need coaching. I mean, it's really sort of an ironic sort of statement to have said. I mean, if you believe in coaching, then truly believe in coaching. and that self-discovery and that self-growth that comes, and whether it's through supervision or mentoring or self-reflection,
Yes.
but that we're doing
Yes.
something to continue to grow ourselves. And I love what you say
Precisely.
also about choosing somebody who's growing, so that you
Yeah.
can grow also, like you're not alone in the growth process.
Precisely. And that's what makes this professional coaching a very sacred vocation. Just like, teachers and educators, they really, guard their vocation with all their hearts and wanted to show up as the best teacher, right? Lawyers, they aspire to be the one who stood for justice, and every vocation, they have that group of people who really, are proud of what they're doing. And if we are proud of what professional coaching is, and then what is calling us out is, number one, be that true, authentic human being who can show the world the power of being able to align and self-reflect and believing in the greatness of people, all. I think that's what we are. That's what we're telling the world.
Yeah. And starting with ourselves, so that we have the
Yep.
capacity to be there for others. Ben, what are you up to that you'd like to share with folks today as we come towards
Well,
the end?
I just want to encourage all our coaches out there who's listening to this podcast is love the very work that you have stepped into, and just allow it to evolve as you grow together with it, and just be surprised, and just kind of like, like some countries have 4 seasons, fabulous. Not like in Singapore, we got only hottest and hottest. Everything remains the same. But be surprised that with each season, brings in new experience, and that your coaching experience itself will become richer and colorful each year, not in terms of what you learn in terms of your techniques, but what you can become as an individual as you continue to serve other people, through this profession. So that's my encouragement to coaches.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful. And it is that connectedness, right? That connectedness with your
Yeah.
passion. Yeah, I love
Yes.
that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the coaching studio. I really appreciate it. And I've absolutely enjoyed this conversation so much. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lyssa, for this privilege to be able to share my voice through your podcast.